All right, well, I want to turn to another big headline for us today. You know, in recent weeks, we've been talking a lot about the city of Charlotte, this ongoing saga with the CMPD Chief settlement. We're learning some new information that kind of bubbled up, if you will, throughout the process of investigating some of the chief's particulars when it comes to payments. Our name Morabito has been doing some great investigative legwork on that, requesting documents and requesting, responses from folks. So Nate, you've got some new information for us. And this is regarding, this sounds like moving expenses that were paid to the chief. Now, this wasn't recent, right? This was when he basically became the chief, correct?
Yeah, I mean, they're labeled moving expenses. And what struck me as I started digging into this and saw some pay stubs I requested, and I'll tell you why I requested them in a minute, but the bottom line is that pay stubs show that in 2020, after the city manager named him as the new chief, Johnny Jennings, the city of Charlotte paid him $77,000 to relocate to the city of Charlotte. He was living fairly close by in a neighboring county. The job posting for the chief job said that you have to live in the city of Charlotte. And there were basically two payments. One shortly after he was named the new chief, before he was sworn in, and then another one after he was sworn in. Fairly sizable. And I don't know how often you've moved. I assume quite often because of the business we're in.
Because of news, yeah, correct.
And I have too. And I mean, I've never heard of a moving expense even close to that.
I mean, this is like a salary for somebody, or maybe two salaries for a person, depending on their role.
And I would have maybe never looked into this had the whole settlement between him and the city happened in the first place. You remember he settled. At first, it was behind closed doors for, we now know, $305,000. He was frustrated by what he felt was an attack by a former city council member against him over his stance at the time on outer carrier vests. And we later learned from the chief himself, he disclosed what the settlement was. That was $305,000. And in the aftermath of that, I was reporting on how his pension would balloon because of these extra payments. Like when he retires for the rest of his life, he's going to get at least an extra $9,000 a year. But through that reporting, I requested his personnel file, which is fairly standard. I mean, that's something I do with a lot of people. And in it, I noticed the year by year how much he was paid. And I noticed in 2020, his pay was like $270,000. He made $279,000 last year. Okay, so he jumped to $270,000. And then I saw in 2021, 2022, and 2023, it was less than $270,000. So I'm like, well, what else is going on here? What other payments did he potentially receive? And there's personnel laws, so the city feels limited in what it can release to us. So I said, well, I'd like to request every pay stub for 2020. And as I was reviewing those pay stubs, I noticed two in particular. One from May 2020, one from August 2020. And I have them right here. The first one from May was for $43,000 for taxable moving expenses. Mm-hmm. The second one from August was for $33,000, almost $34,000, also for taxable moving expenses. So you have this $305,000 settlement already. You have a pension that's partially taxpayer funded that's increasing now because of this. And then you have, in his hiring, a $77,000 combined payment for moving expenses. And I know the public's going to be frustrated about this. I think there's a lot of questions that we all need to be asking about this. This seems unusual. I've asked the city of Charlotte to provide, number one, their policy on relocation, but also to justify this. And my deadline was 3 o'clock. 3 o'clock has come and gone, and I've not heard back yet. I'm just checking just to make sure that they haven't emailed me since. So we interviewed the Taxpayers Protection Alliance, who I know you all have talked with before. Mm-hmm. We interviewed them earlier today, actually, and they're like the same thing you said, Vanessa. Some people's income is $77,000. And this isn't a cross-country move. This is, one county over. And it all goes back to the city, the way the city government operates, right? We can easily say, well, this chief is just taking taxpayer money. But the thing is, somebody approved giving him this money? And I think that's where our questions need to start, quite honestly. The city manager is who hires department heads. And that's why we want to know from the city manager, how does he justify this? It's just unlike anything I've ever heard of. And it's just like these breadcrumbs keep popping up about this whole situation. There were major concerns about transparency, then the amount of the payment, and now throw another $77,000 on top of that from 5 years ago. It's eye-popping.
Well, and you talked about the fact, and, as we've tried to dive into the settlement, we've come up with the fact that, with personnel matters, as you just mentioned, it can be difficult to get the full picture because there's some protections with that. Do we know if this would have been the type of item or decision that would have happened in the public eye? For example, when you go to a city council meeting, you can see officials talk about a lot and before your very eyes. You can hear them talk about dollars and cents, but in some cases, there can be closed door sessions where things get discussed that the public can't hear. So do you know if this would have ever been discussed openly, or if this would probably have been
Yeah, I can't imagine.
It's tough to say, I know.
I can't imagine what this is. The city council holds public business. The city council, they are the boss of the city manager, and that's it. The city manager is the boss of everyone else. And so when you're talking about department heads like the chief of police, this goes through a massive hiring process. They have tons of candidates. I went back and listened to the 2020 introduction of Chief Jennings from Marcus Jones. They had tons of candidates to choose from. They picked him. Mm-hmm. And what you'll hear from the Taxpayers Protection Alliance, who is being very critical of this payment, as they have of other things. No one is saying that cities and employers shouldn't assume some of the cost of helping someone move. That's standard, especially when you're incentivizing trying to hire the best people. What I don't suspect happens in the public light is these negotiations between, a new employee and the hiring manager of saying, well, here's what I think would be fair, here's what I can do for you. And that's, when we're contract employees, we negotiate all the time, right? I never tell anybody what my negotiations are like. And in the public sector, because personnel laws are so strict, you really can't find out that much. I asked them why did he get so much more money in 2020, and there were no records to explain that, essentially. So I had to ask for every pay stub to even find that out. And I think that that's what's really interesting here, is that if we want to make our government question and second guess their decisions, and maybe they still are the right decisions, we need to really put the pressure on them. And one of my favorite stories is when I was in Tennessee. I was in Tennessee for a long time. After I left, I had heard stories about how, different agencies or governing bodies considered doing things and said, well, what if Nate Morabito finds out? And that's the way it should be for everything. What if the public finds out? Mm-hmm. What if John Q. Public finds out about this, not just the media? So again, it's just more questions on the city of Charlotte that I don't know they're going to answer because of the personnel laws, but we all should be asking them, why are we doing this? And how, another thing I'm wondering, how often is this kind of thing happening for department heads? I'm already planning other public records requests. How many moving expenses have been issued in the last 5 years, and to who?
Mm-hmm. So, in light of no response yet from the city by your imposed deadline, what comes next? How do we try to get answers? Is there state auditor? I know they've looked, they've stepped in previously here with this ongoing saga.
Yeah, so number one, I shared the link to our web article, which is live now with the state auditor as soon as it went live. And I've asked for any comment they may have. That was a short time ago, so we'll see. Our story's going to air on TV at 6 o'clock. We'll see if anybody says anything between now and then. There is a city council meeting tonight, so I would imagine there will be chatter in the chamber about this. Now, I don't know that it'll spill over into the public side of it. There's a zoning meeting. But I would suspect that members of the public will start asking questions about what's happening here. And I don't know if the auditor is going to take this into consideration of all payments, but what the Taxpayers Protection Alliance told me, this seems to be a pattern of, at least in this particular case, paying one particular employee a significant amount of money over a long time period and not just basic pay. And I think that, there will be additional questions about that. When we still didn't know the terms of the agreement for a settlement, which included his retirement in January, by the way, there were some accusations of, well, this man is friends with the city manager and the mayor, and that's why they're kind of giving him this much money, which the mayor and some city council members dispelled fairly quickly. But now we have another large payment that people are going to say, why him? This is an internal candidate, too. This isn't somebody, they were going, from California trying to attract to come to Charlotte. This is a person who lived not too far away from the city that he spent his whole career working in. Something like 30 years? Is that what we said? I believe it was his whole career, but he's been a long-time employee. And so now we're paying this much money to move him. But all-star employees can demand, all-star treatment. And I don't know if that happened in this case. I don't know that we're going to find out what happened in this case. But either way, the records are what the records are. And they're very clearly telling me that in that year, his pay increased substantially, in part because of $77,000 worth of moving expenses.
Really, really interesting stuff. Okay, so to be continued, perhaps. And I feel like we pointed this out when we started our back and forth here, our chat, that this came up as you were looking into the settlement. So, are there any other documents that you're still yet to go? I imagine you got a lot.
Unfortunately, the city doesn't always and hasn't always quickly responded to public records requests. I have several. You never know if there's going to be a story there or not, but that's why we ask. Sometimes it's just to make sure that every box is checked. But other times, it seemed odd to me in that year that there was so much money paid to him. So I figured there was something that happened there. I didn't know if it was a signing bonus or what. But yeah, there's tons of other records still out there. Just when you think this story is over, it's not. And then the Fraternal Order of Police was going to have this vote of no confidence against him. They ended up not getting enough support to even really
have a
vote that mattered. So I don't know if they've simply just moved on because he's moving on too. But I can imagine, because he has worked for a long time in Charlotte, and I've interviewed him, in fact, very early on after he was named chief. He has said, he's really working to improve the city and to leave a lasting legacy of all the good he helped try to do. And we can only imagine that all of this news continues to put a little tarnish on that, and who should be the one answering for it? Generally it would be the people that are signing the checks.
Yeah. And to your point, not that this is, the documents that you have now that you're looking at are necessarily condemning anyone. It's just we don't know what the real answer is. We don't know what the justification, to your point, is of why this happened, and it's really why we're asking, not to condemn anyone, just to get to the bottom of what's going on here, as the public deserves to know.
And are they following their policy? I don't know tax law. What is the tax law on this? I don't know. These are all questions that hopefully, as the public consumes this information, maybe people who have knowledge can shed some more light on it. But I think the policy, number one, is the city's policy allow for these kind of payments? That's interesting. Are they following their own policy? How high or low can a moving expense be? I don't know that there's a set in stone situation there, but the public should know about this. This is their money.
Yeah.
And they should have a say. And they're getting a say now, but it's 5 years later. But again, you got to be engaged. You got to go to City Hall, and it's very hard to do with busy and hectic schedules. I don't blame people at all. But the more we can kind of reveal, I think the more fire that is fueled to continue asking questions from the public's perspective too, not just us.
All right. So when can folks see your piece tonight, your update tonight?
Yep. Number one, you can go to WCNC.com and see the web article right now. And then our story, I'll join you guys in the studio at 6 o'clock tonight.
All right. And once again, as this story develops, come on by, Nate. Give us updates here in the Live Impact News studio. Who knows?
Never know what's going to be next.
Knows?
It's wild. I'd never anticipated this would be the story that would be next.
Yeah. I think a lot of folks are just, staying tuned because, to your point, it has been kind of a twist and turn as we go situation.